Alright everyone, how's it going? The castle here, about to explain some stuff. So, last night I decided that I was going to give a shot to creating the ability for players to apply materials to the objects in the world. That's what I thought I was going to do. I tried a few different things. I ran into some issues. Um, there's no, like, the solutions that I came up with, like, that I had, like, experimented with, ideas that I wanted to try, ended up actually making things worse. They didn't make things better. And I'm going to explain why. So the first thing that I actually tried was making it so that whenever you have a mesh selected, you'll see a details panel that pops up, kind of like when I have like one of these kind of objects or something like that. Um, sort of just like that, right? And like you can see all the different materials that the object has, and then you can switch what material is what and everything like that. The problem with that though is that it just made things feel really crappy. It felt like the UX just took a dive. Like there was absolutely no additional. It just felt really bad, right? There's no way around it. I think that there's actually an issue here that's not going to be so easy to solve, and that is that like it just made everything feel bogged down. It made everything feel 10 times more complicated. It lost all of its flow. One of the best things about this level editor is that it kind of just flows right now. And all that flow immediately got shit all over the moment I tried to make it so that you can, apply a different material. Because now you're looking at this little tiny window. Every time you look at anything, you end up seeing a window here, which, it just ends up being this like ever-present thing that's constantly in your face. And it ends up being really annoying, right? Now, I made it so that like a thing pops up and you can select the texture and then it puts down there. Okay, so the other problem that I ran into is that when it's done that way, it was so bad that I already removed everything. Like I'm serious. Like I already just went back to something else. So I'll explain that in a second though. But let's take a more complicated object, right? All of the material IDs that I create are done using a they're using like all the material IDs are placed arbitrarily by me in terms of like whatever it is that I'm actually doing. Actually, I can go to a cooler spot. Hold on, let me delete this and fly out to an area. It's kind of depressing to see everything using the default material again. But anyway, regardless, um, when you look at this object, oh, I don't know why it stuttered like that. When you look at this object, there's four material IDs on this object. I created it because I wanted to do the testing of it, right? There's a material ID here for the those regular like blocks. So you see like a whole bunch of like small blocks right here, and then there's a and then underneath here is for like like the metal repeating texture or whatever on the top, and then on the top up here I can place a floor texture on the top of it as well, so like it's an object that you can actually use as a floor for an overhang, but it can also just be used as a pillar and whatever. That's nice and all, but to the end user that's going to feel arbitrary no matter what you do. Like when you just see a list of four material IDs that are just sitting there, you know what I mean, like this, and there's just four material IDs, and you could see like, okay, you know, when I switch one of them, it'll switch something else that I wasn't expecting it to switch. Right? It's very arbitrary. There's nothing I can really do about that. It doesn't. That's one of the main things that really happens here is that, uh, not all objects have tops. Not all objects have bottoms. I mean, what's the bottom of this object? It's a concave as hell shape with a whole bunch of different potential bottoms, right? So like I mean, one of the reasons why being able to apply textures works so well with brushes in this respect, where you can just select a material and then you can just sort of slap it down on brushes, is that you can do it on a per surface basis. There's no guesswork as to what arbitrary material ID the developer had in mind when he created the object. There's no guesswork, right? Well, in this particular case, there's really no way around it. this is a situation where this is a situation where there isn't really anything I can do to solve that problem. So it's going to end up adding a lot to the stress, the overall stress that you'll feel as a developer while you're working in the environment, constantly wondering like what material ID is for what part of the shape. Like the top of a ramp, is for the stairs, right? Like if you're going to put a stair texture, but you might actually not just use a stair texture, you might use something else, right? Like there's a lot of different types of shapes. There's a lot of different, there's a whole kinds of stuff. I mean, these are supposed to be railings right here, right? Um, yeah, this ends up being really convoluted. It's not cool. It feels bad. It just feels bad, and I'm not happy with the results. So what I'm gonna do is I might end up actually just going back to my original idea in the first place. Now, the original idea is that you go into editor mode and you click on meshes and you click on base and you'll see all of the different base objects that would be all these things using the current base set that I'm currently working with right now, and you place all those and you just place them as separate objects. So you have like 4 or 5 different wall types with different materials on them, and that's that, right? Now, the only problem with doing it this way is that the icon that represents the object um, might end up being a little bit harder to understand. Like when you look at the icon for these, you see the shape, right? But then I'm going to have a lot more icons for all of the different shapes with all of the different materials already applied to them. What I'm thinking of doing is just making it so that you can read the name multi-floor corner and then it just shows the material that it's using for now, right? But in the case of like the prototype objects, I'll just show the prototype object itself. So prototype actually will end up just being the mesh, or no, actually it'll just be prototype. It's the original idea I had in mind in the first place. That gets around the whole problem because, but it also creates, a much more, a much bigger list, a much larger list of potential objects. So like it kind of inflates pretty quickly. But that's not really that big of a deal in a lot of ways because a lot of these objects will only have one material on them anyway. Like the terrain and stuff like that, there's no reason why these spikes, should have like a brick texture on them and stuff like that. There's just a lot of stuff that you can just immediately assume is never going to happen. So that's pretty much what I'm going to do. I'm just going to if I do it that way, at least it's smooth. At least it's smoother, and you can get away with it. It's kind of already set up to use that method. Um, yeah. Now there's another bug that's bugging me right now is that for whatever reason, when you're a client, you still see the selection of the terrain, even though it's locked. You shouldn't be able to do anything with it. Yeah. I wonder if there's a way to bug this out where. No. Okay. Well, you can't bug it out, but Um, yeah, it's kind of annoying that you can still see the selection of it. You're not supposed to see the selection of the object. You're supposed to just see it's supposed to just show right down here, and then you can click on lock, in which case then you can select it. But for the most part, yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead with the original idea I had in the first place. It's a little bit more brute forcey that way. You have to be a little bit more creative with the objects that I do give you. Like, there might not be a particular floor panel, but I can just keep adding to that list. It's really not actually that big of a deal. Um, but yeah, this is I guess this is just going to be one of those things that has to happen this way. Like maybe if the data table ends up getting too convoluted or too big, I can point to different data tables or something like that. I don't know what the limitation is going to be, but I can easily see a game, fully developed that there would probably be, a few, maybe 2,000 different objects that you can place or something like that. That's like on the far end, and I'm pretty sure a data table can handle a couple thousand entries, right? Right? Maybe? I guess we're gonna find out. All right. Anyway, with that said, though, yeah, you could tell here, like, I'm actually really happy with the triplanar material combined with the thing. You can't really see it right now, but I did a lot of experimentation with just jamming lots of models together to create these sort of outdoor environments and everything like that. And I think that it's really possible to just use what I've already got, like the current system, and not have to go with the landscape or being able to paint the terrain or whatever. Just jamming lots of large objects together, um, and then placing lots of small objects inside of the large object works perfectly well, I think. I think it's going to be able to make some really nice outdoor environments. And now you really can't see it, but there's kind of like a Subnautica kind of vibe going on whenever I place one of these round squares with a triplanar material. It just sort of like looks like it's doing that same sort of thing where you can, I don't know how to I'll be able to show it tomorrow in tomorrow's video, um, because I'm gonna have more materials, more objects, more everything. Okay, already kind of set up, so we'll be able to take a look. But yeah, there's actually like I don't know. There's something to this. I think it works. I think it works really well. I think you'll be happy with the results once you get to actually see it in action. I mean, there are some issues that maybe like the textures themselves need a lot of work. Like, I'm not really super happy with the sandstone looking brick at the moment. It doesn't fit properly. What I might start to do is kind of start looking for advice from artists and be like, yeah, what can I do just to make this, look like it fits a little bit better and not look like sandstone or something. You know what I mean? But with that said, the uh, the material selection system, the ideas that I had already had in the first place, like switching over to this, like the naming convention, as long as I'm just cool with the naming convention and everything like that, this should work out pretty well. Um, and I know that right for now, like just showing the diffuse map of whatever the material is going to be, like of the base material of the object, even though some of these objects are going to have like three or four fucking material IDs, um, should be enough to kind of like give you an idea of what you're dealing with when you place the object, right? Uh, so I guess this is just one of those times where it just makes sense to keep it simple, stupid. You know what I mean? So, yeah. Now I know that yesterday and everything like that, you were looking at this and everything was all fully textured and none of it had any of the none of it had any of the placeholder shit on it. But I think by tomorrow's video, you'll be looking at everything all being textured again and looking like it's supposed to look, or at least back to its early stages of at least an initial art pass of some sort. And then from there, you'll see more meshes, and then I'm just going to keep adding to the list. Literally, the data table being the list. There'll just be more and more stuff. Now, um, yeah, that's pretty much that. I mean, everything else is pretty much unchanged. So this kind of simplifies things in some ways because it gives me the opportunity to kind of just sidestep all of the UX bullshit that I was gonna try and fight against and see if I can get things working correctly. It looks to me like we'll be in pretty good shape, I think. So saved a backup file 79. 79 backup files. Yeesh. This thing's a little aggressive when it comes to the back files, isn't it? With that said, I think that that's pretty much it. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that comes to mind off right now. I mean, there needs to be a lot more meshes. There needs to be getting more materials. You'll actually see the materials in place. I think for experiment's sake, I guess one more detail, for experiment's sake, even though I wasn't really planning on making this a very large open area, I'm going to give it a shot and make this, maybe double its current size, just to kind of stress test things to see what it's like. Um, when you're actually so this will be the most open area in all of Revulsion. Like when you play this level in Revulsion 1, this will be like way more open-ended than most of the other content, and there'll be a lot more going on in this one area than, and it'll be pretty different. I'll probably end up, relegate uh, the combat down to like ambush sequences where you walk through and like an ambush might happen or something like that. But yeah, I just kind of get an idea of how that feels and what that's like, and yeah, just kind of get an idea of what people actually think about that. And then I got to figure out how to get this in so that people can select it and actually play it without having to do any convoluted stuff like, grabbing the file and placing it in the app data folder and whatever. I think that's actually workshop support. So workshop support is something that I guess needs to happen sooner than later, which means that the early development versions of this level editor also need to be on the Steam Workshop, right, as the SDK or something, right? Because that's basically what's going to be going on. Is you're going to be getting Revulsion 2 for free as an SDK before it becomes the game, which will be RevX 2. It'll be packaged pretty differently, um, and will be a pretty different style of game. Actually, I'm going to learn a lot of lessons, I think. If I learned a lot just working on Revulsion 1, I can't wait to learn all the learning that I'm going to have to learn with the learning in Revulsion 2. It's going to be kind of interesting. I mean, in a lot of ways, I started having Subnautica flashbacks when I was working on this outdoor area. I'm not even kidding. Like, I wonder if I should just do the same shit. Like, just have like nodes everywhere and have the game kind of decide which ones get populated with loot, and you can kind of just go around and be like, oh, there's some iron over here. Oh fuck, there's a thing chasing me. um, and it'd actually be kind of interesting too. I want to experiment with the idea of making the different classes really dependent on each other too. Like you can't really play the game alone. You need friends. Like you can, but like it's a very different experience. Like like if you play as the humans versus the sentients versus the uh, transhumanists. Like if you play as humans, you're basically like way more vulnerable. You're slower. You don't really, you're really good at building stuff, but you're good at gathering and building, but you're not really good at fighting or crafting the weapons that you need in order to survive and everything like that. So like you end up kind of playing a different experience entirely. But like if you're a sentient, then you really can't build anything. You're kind of just this war machine that can fuck anything up in the world, but you really can't gather any resources. Like you don't have a way to further build up your weapons or anything like that unless you start hanging out with humans and sentients. Like you kind of just like you have this sort of like thing where it's like, you kind of pick like how your experience will be, but you're absolutely fucking dependent on your friends. You have to have people playing with you if you really want to experience the game properly. You have to have people like building up their whatever it is that they actually decide to play as. And also too, you'll notice that I already have this planned out, or at least I've had it planned out for a while. It's already part of the core functionality. You'll notice that there is the ability to spawn monsters and possess monsters. So like people who join in but don't have permission because the server doesn't give them permission, uh, they'll have they'll you can actually assign them the ability to spawn monsters and possess monsters, which basically the scourge are the sort of like the evil faction or something like that, right? They're from we're in some kind of weird dimension, everything like that. That means that people who aren't directly playing the game can actually PvP with you. They can jump in and they can kind of, somebody who's just flying around as a spectator can watch what you're doing and then, spawn get a bunch of his friends and kind of like spawn a little invasion force of PvE monsters to fight against you. And that's the idea right there. Because I mean, possessing monsters or taking the monsters over and having them actually be something that already kind of exists, and the scourge can be anything. I mean, um, but there could actually just be like sort of like enemy factions as well. So there's actually like a PvP element maybe if you want it to be there, but really it would just be like PvE. Get the PvP to feel like PvE. You know what I mean? So like rather than just shooting bags out a bag, a big bag of health, you're really shooting at a big bag of health that knows how to fucking move around and probably wants to troll the shit out of you. You know what I mean? Like you're not just shooting like a giant monster that's going to get stuck in a wall and you can like shoot him in the hand until he dies or something like that. No, these could end up being potentially just like other players that just casually join the server with the permission to be able to just fuck with things, you know. Um that's sort of just like a weird idea, but you never really get to see that, right? And also too, I mean, what about the possibility too, like of having somebody who is a spectator that has the ability to spawn monsters and stuff, but also can like kind of like spawn events or you know what I mean? Like I don't know. These are all kind of like up in the air things, but these are all things that I'm pretty sure I know how to implement them and get them all working. It's just sort of like a matter of like figuring out mentally like what's going to work, like what are the limitations? Am I going to hit some kind of a wall? Like if I try to keep doing this, if I keep pushing the engine, is it, am I going to start seeing like performance issues because there's too many like replicated objects in the editor mode or you know what I mean? Like, but using the hierarchical instancing, I can get around those kinds of limitations. It might not be the most convenient, but like when you actually play the game, you play it in a much more efficient manner where the world is actually just built up of out of lots and lots of components which are not separate objects and there's no replication involved. Everyone has the same files and there's no need to replicate everything. In fact, a lot of stuff won't be replicated. It'll just be, a big static world with static spawn points and static loot locations, and then only things that are actually replicated are the things that are around the actual players. So that limits things quite a bit. I don't know. Of course, performance, if you see my frame rate starts to kind of hitch a little bit, it doesn't help when I'm using OBS and I have multiple windows rendering at the same time, but I didn't notice any performance issues until recently. I guess as the levels continue to get more complex and larger, uh, well, I guess we're gonna find out like exactly what the limits are. Honestly, if a project like this can exist, then that's a really cool, interesting situation. Um, Really, all I need to do is just be given the space that I need to be able to develop the stuff that I want, and that's really it. Like that's it. And this basically the sky's the limit at that point. Anyway, let me stop talking at this point. I'm gonna. All right, I've been already talking for too long. Anyway, take it easy and stay tuned for more.